Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Intel Alumni Network very special event. But before we even get started, as some of you may have heard, we're honored that we have a special guest. Pat Gelsinger is going to say a few words before we get started.
Hey, thank you, Ryan. And pleasure to join you all. And obviously having someone of Dave's caliber and history with the company speaking about Andy Grove and his leadership style, I think is super interesting. And one, of course, that I had a unique relationship with both Andy and with Dave. And just by way of introduction, when I was, first working on the 386 and then was leading the 486, both Andy and Dave taught me some very important management lessons at the time. And, one of which is Andy had a unique knack for talent. He'd see people, he would pick people, he would engage with individuals because he knew that, technology problems were, invention. They were people, but they required people of passion. And I remember when I was working on the 486 at the time, there was a host of noise around the company as well as around the industry on risk versus CISC. And I was just a passionate driver of compatibility and x86 and CISC. And, my thesis advisor at Stanford, John Hennessy, was the Mr. Risk at the time. And we were having public debates. And Andy was just, you're going to run the 486 because I know I can trust your passion, right? Your commitment, your leadership to, drive the 486. But then, while that project was going on, guess whose organization it was under? Dave House. I was an up-and-coming guy, but Dave was big, important, senior leader in the company. So Dave had the responsibility to make sure that I was successful, with the 486, carrying, this assignment from Andy, forward into the organization. So, my memories of Dave are extensive as we're going through this period of time. And I recall one particular time where I really, really needed to talk to Dave. And he wasn't available. His office kept putting me off. And, I really needed to talk to him. So, next thing you know, I'm sitting on the seat flying to Chicago next to Dave House. And I cover all of my topics with him. And as the plane is about to start landing in Chicago, Dave says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "San Jose." And I says, "I just needed to meet with you, Dave." Right. And there was just this fun story. I'm not even sure Dave remembers it, but I have so many good thoughts on Dave, his leadership, and, disappointed when he left the company for it. And I know that, many things would be different had he chosen a different path. But during his time at Intel, he was one of the closest leaders next to Andy, one of the people who I believe had greatest opportunity to learn from him. And if I was going to listen to somebody describe some of Andy's management skills and techniques and, what we can learn from him today, Dave would be high on that list. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dave House, a friend, partner for many years, and somebody who, led Intel to some of our greatest moments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Fantastic. So, again, welcome. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Bruce Schechter. I had the honor of founding the Intel Alumni Network way back when I was young. And I'm president emeritus of the organization now. So, as you probably know, we do many kinds of events at the Intel Alumni Network. Sometimes they're social events and they're great fun, but more often than not, we focus on thought leadership, and that's certainly the topic tonight. And the new leadership at the Intel Alumni Network, led by James Cape and others on the board of directors here, they're putting a big focus on high output management as a theme, and revisiting all the great things we learned in our careers at Intel through Andy, through his book, High Output Management, et cetera. And I'm hard-pressed to name a person who would not be more of an example of learning high output management and conveying it at Intel and then elsewhere in his career, and that would be Dave House, who we'll introduce momentarily here. So I want to take a personal privilege and say I was at Intel from 80 to 97, a very exciting time to be there. And for me, a high point of my time at Intel was 91 through 94 when I worked directly for Dave as his TA, or technical assistant. That was the first time anybody, aside from Andy, who had ever had a TA, so for what that's worth. So anyway, a lot of exciting things happened in those days. Dave was soon promoted into a position of Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy, and we'd run a yearly product planning process across the company. Dave traveled the world as a featured keynote speaker for the introduction of the Pentium processor in wonderful cities all over the world. It was a good time. And we ran a yearly event called Tech Forum, where we would engage all the leaders in the PC industry, software and hardware partners. I see faces here, people who were involved in orchestrating that. And great standards for the PC industry came out of that by cooperation amongst the players there, like the PCI standard for desktop and servers, and then USB for laptops, et cetera. Things we all take for granted today began there. So anyway, without further ado, I do want to say we have a live audience here, so those of you who are watching from elsewhere will know there is an audience here. There's also, we will produce this for the Intel Alumni Network through social media, and the video will be available on our website. And Sean Flynn, who will be interviewing Dave here momentarily, an old friend of ours. He's an investment banker here in the Valley, and he also, in his copious spare time, produces a podcast called Silicon Valley Podcast. So this video will go out through his podcast as well, because there are so many people fascinated by the history of Intel and what Andy Grove taught. By the way, I talk to startups all the time. It's amazing how often they have dug up Andy's books and read them and are putting this kind of thing into practice. So please welcome Dave and Sean, who will take the stage.
Hello, Sean.
Dave, I'm excited for this interview.
Yeah.
Before the first question, just some housekeeping. We will have open Q&A later on. For that time, please just go to the mics. Do not move the mics, but line up, go to the mics to ask questions. And for the audience at home, there are ways to submit your questions that will be fed to me, and I'll ask Dave on your behalf. But before diving into leadership, I got to ask you, you're always smiling on the prep calls before this, you're laughing, joking around. What does happiness mean for you?
Well, first of all, let me say that philosophers forever have asked what's the purpose of life, and I think I got an answer for it. And the answer is to be happy. If you take anything and compare it with happy wins. Money might help you be happy, but I know people with money that aren't happy. And winning might make you happy, but all winners aren't happy. The real objective, these are just vehicles. There are a lot of things that can make you happy, and the real challenge of life is finding out what it is that makes you happy, because you want to maximize the area under the curve. You want to be happy as much as you can. And so the secret is finding out what makes you happy. I have a simple formula.
Okay.
The formula says happiness equals reality minus expectation. When expectation exceeds reality, you're not happy. When reality exceeds expectation, you're happy. Now, I have a friend I play golf with, and he's a much better golfer than I am. But he's not quite as good as he thinks he is.
Yeah.
So his expectations are a little higher. When he hits a really good shot, he thinks that should be, but when he hits a bad shot, he's really unhappy. So a good shot is just neutral to him. To me, I get a good shot, I'm really happy. And if I hit a bad shot, my expectations were that high anyway. And so the objective is to be happy. That's what life is about.
Okay, so set the bar very low.
Well, there's two things to manage here. Everybody's working on reality. Expectations a lot easier to manage. And so you have to be very smart about your expectation. I'm not saying be lazy, don't try to do things, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just saying be realistic about life.
Okay. I'm wondering if anyone can really be happy then that's a golfer. But
You know, I think that happiness and score don't necessarily go together. Happiness and expectation go together. Okay. So you can be a happy golfer no matter how well you golf.
okay, now let's pivot into kind of the topic of tonight, leadership.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about the psychology of leadership?
Well, leadership is really, you have to start out with physiology. My brain is connected to my nerves, to all my muscles, and everything inside my skin is under my control. Everything outside my skin is under influence. Now, leadership is not about management. You can influence your boss. You influence your people in your family, your wife, your spouse, your kids. You can influence the people in your social organization, in your corporation. And so leadership is really about your ability to influence other people. So you have to figure out what your objective is, and then the actions you can take to increase the probability of that action happening. Now, when leadership gets into management, it's important to remember that you got triage here. There's only so much influence you can exert, and there's a lot of things to influence out there. And so you got to pick what you're going to influence. And if there's 10 ways to do I have a rule, 8 out of 10. If there's 10 ways to do things, 8 of them probably will work. 2 of them aren't going to work. So as a manager, when you're exerting influence, you have to really think about what are the 2. And let your subordinates or other people that are going to execute select which are the 8, because you may have a favorite, but just because it's your favorite doesn't mean they're going to execute that the best way. If you let them execute it their way, they're committed because it's their way. If you try to tell them which of the 8 ways to do it, it's your way and you're responsible, and they don't have to succeed. So you really need to let others choose how to do it so that you can manage your influence on things in your life to increase the maximum probability that you achieve the outcome you want, which will make you happy.
Okay, there was a lot there. So I got control versus influence.
Yep.
You can't control the situation, but you can influence it. I got 8 out of 10. If there's 10 choices, 8 are going to fail.
No, 8 could work. I could be wrong. It could be 5 and 10. I don't know. But the concept is the same. You just got to find the ones that are going to fail and influence people from not doing one of those.
Then for those 2, that the probability, I guess, are higher that those 2 would work. How do you
work? Those 2 won't work.
Won't work.
Yeah. You got to if there's 10 ways to do things, most of them can be made to work. It may take a little imagination. It may be a little more work. Everybody's going to optimize differently. Don't get tied up in that fact.
Okay. Now thinking about, you said the people below and then the people above, let the people below make the decisions because then it's theirs. What about the CEO? What's their role?
The CEO, you can influence your boss. You have there's a lot of management styles. And you look at how you influence people under you and then how you are being managed. There was a book written in the 80s called Situational Leadership. Grove insisted that we all take that class. We got trained with him. My summary of it is there's 4 quadrants, and there's 4 different management styles: telling, selling, participating, and delegating. Telling is for tasks that are very specific. I'll give you some examples. I'm a barrister at Starbucks. I got to make that cafe latte the same as every other barrister at that store and every other store around the world. I don't get to say I can make a better cafe latte. Or you're in the military, you're in training camp, and the drill instructor says, do 50 push-ups, and you say, I think 40 would be enough. And he'll probably say, no, 400. There are times like that in a battle scene where there's very specific things that you can and can't do. The selling is where you're involved with people and it's a more complex thing and it's not black and white and you're trying to convince them the objective you get and they're trying to figure out how to get there and that's where 8 out of 10 really, there's probably 8 ways it can be made to work out of any 10 that could be thought of. Then we get into participating. So let's suppose I got a staff. I happen to be an engineer by trade, designer. And let's say my staff is made up of a marketing guy and a manufacturing guy and a technology development person and a computer-aided tools guy, person, and a lot of different capabilities. Now I'm in there, we're trying to solve a multifaceted problem. And I just become, although I'm the leader, I should just become one of the people. I'm one of the team. And I should defer to people who have more expertise than I do. Yeah, yes, I'll have my opinions, and I'll have my influence, but the decision has got to be made by considering all points of view. And then there's delegating, the fourth quadrant, which is, my example is, you're doing cancer research. You got a bunch of PhD research people. You got some Nobel Prize winners in there, and you're in charge of the lab. Well, your job basically is to remove the roadblocks. You get to make some decisions relative to spending, et cetera, but mainly you're trying to make sure that they can be as productive as they can be. And interestingly, people wind up living in different quadrants for different tasks. Some things, they don't have much job-relevant maturity, as Grove used to say, and you need to treat them in quadrant 1. And then there's people who are working on a more higher scale, and then you manage them there. But they might, for one task, be in quadrant 1, and another task be in quadrant 3. Pat talked about recognizing talent, and I think one of the most important skills a leader has is to understand the people and where their level of maturity is in each level. And so how to manage those, influence them in those cases. Of course, when you're the boss, you have a lot more influence. Your boss, you maybe have less influence, but everybody around you, your family, your social organization, whatever influence winds up being important. There are people, I don't believe in blame.
Huh. Wait, go deeper on that. That's interesting.
Blame is a failure to understand the expectation part of the happy formula. When you're blaming somebody, you're not happy. And so your expectations exceeded their reality. And so they didn't do it the way you would have done it. Usually it's, well, I would have been on time. Well, that's not who they are. Or I would have followed up on that or gotten back to you and told you I couldn't. Another Grovian principle. But that may not be theirs. And so they're not, usually when you're blaming somebody, it's always because they're not meeting your expectation, and generally the cause of that is the lack of understanding of their background and how they make decisions or their job relevant maturity.
So then in the leader position, how well should they know each of the people one level below them with their expectations, their quadrants, how well do you have to know someone to manage or lead them?
One of the, let me back up here. I think my advice to CEOs is there's only 2 things a CEO does. And if you're doing anything other than that, you're not spending enough time with this. And the first one is to listen. And I mean active listen, to read body language. What do they say? What do they do? How do they act? Where are they on the job relevant maturity scale that I talked about earlier? What are their capabilities versus your expectations? And if their capabilities aren't up to your expectations, how can you influence them in a way or supplement them in a way that where you'll get the results that you desire? So a CEO listens, pays attention to everybody, all up and down the scale, not just their staff, and the competition, and the political environment, and the Wall Street environment. It listens. And the second thing is and the only other task, is they communicate. And most CEOs under-communicate. You've got to be very clear about what is important and what your expectations are and what the objective is. And a lot of CEOs think that if they say it once or twice or 3 times or 10 times, that's enough. No, You got to just beat away at the same message over and over and over again. So you got to communicate, you listen, you communicate. Too many CEOs want to do their old job. They're comfortable with it. So they were a designer, or they were a manufacturing person. So they want to contribute there. Get somebody that knows how to do that. And that's, by the way, true for every level of management. I was a VP working for Grove for 13 years, but still, I had to listen and sense and know what was going on. I had to listen to my boss, but I had to listen to my team, et cetera, and know who the good. I put my finger on Pat Gelsinger very early. I said, this guy's got talent. He's smart and he can do stuff. And my expectations went up, and he continued to do very well. There are other people you say, well, they're very good at this. I need to understand that. So I need to utilize them in that area. And I can't, because their job relevant maturity in this other area isn't quite so good. So I don't want to assign them that. They're going to fail.
You'd mentioned, there's a couple of things there I want to dive a little bit deeper on. The 2 roles of a CEO, listen in and then repeating the same message.
Communicate.
Is it fair to say?
And you, by the way, you do it in different ways. You don't just do it verbally. You put it in writing. When I was CEO of Bay Networks, I put our objectives in every conference room and every elevator. Really? I made posters and put it there so that, remember and I put them in the restrooms. That's where people go and they actually read something.
I'm sure that'd still be good nowadays. So keep sending the same message until...
In different forms. You got to communicate it in every way. Put it in your newsletter, put it up in posters. When you talk to people, you talk about it. And most importantly, your actions. When your words and your actions conflict, people believe your actions and forget your words.
Interesting. Are there any stories that you remember where there's a time where there's actions and words that didn't align?
Well, I think there's a lot of examples. When I went to Bay Networks, I left Intel because there was a broad product line, a strong engineering team, customer support. People wanted an alternative to Cisco. No adult supervision, lacking adult supervision. That's easy. I mean, the other parts are really hard. But having worked for Grove for all those years and been at Intel, and having thought about those things, the actions, the things that leadership there was saying were not consistent with the way that they were acting. Now, I won't be too critical of my predecessor, but the stock price went up a lot after I joined.
Hence a lot of travel now.
Yeah.
In an organization, how important is the decision-making process?
Decision-making is the most important process in any organization. I think that there's three major processes: managing for results, conflict resolution, but I think that decision-making is the most important in any organization, in a company, in a club, in a church, in a family, and anywhere where multiple people are working in some way together to do something. The way that those decisions get made is critical, and the better that process, the higher the probability that the organization will succeed. The worse that process, the better chance that it's going to fail. And if there's anything in any organization that I would look at to determine its success factor, it would be how it makes decisions.
Is there additional information you can share on what is a good decision-making process or things that should be included in one?
Well, any good decision has got four main characteristics. One is it's aligned. In a company, you want all the force vectors going the same way. You got to figure out what's really important, and you got everybody aligned in that direction. You can't have internal politics. You can't have somebody trying to get somebody else's job, make a decision based on that, or somebody trying to look better than somebody else, or some organization be more successful. It's a team sport. Corporations are a team sport. There's winners and losers at the corporation level. And infighting within a organization, a corporation, is not conducive to the organization and its overall organization succeeding. So decisions have to be aligned with those objectives. They have to be scaled. What do I mean by that? We make thousands of decisions. You decided where to park here tonight. And some people park closest to the door so they have minimum walking, and some of them park furthest from the doors so they have a lot of walking, and some park under the tree so it doesn't get too much sun, and some people don't park under the tree because they don't want any sap on their car.
Some people are still parking right now.
That's right. Well, I have to say that it took me a while to figure out where to park and how to get into this room. But there's decisions coming at us all the time. We don't know most of the decisions we make. You can tell by our actions what they make. But what I'm going to eat, what I'm going to order at a restaurant, which aisle I want, which chair we sit in. We make those decisions all the time. You need to scale a decision-making process to the decision. Which chair we sit in is really, really important. That was, where I parked. Well, I got my algorithm. In fact, a lot of things I do are sort of by an algorithm because I've thought them out. But there are big decisions that require an extensive process. And Pat referred to the decisions around risk versus CISC. Those are really big decisions. Those aren't decisions that you just make snap. There's not decisions you make. You need to have a very good process. And a good process includes what's the decision? Because sometimes it kind of wanders and people don't like the way it's going. They'll try it. I always say write it down. Who's a decision maker?
Question on that, who's the decision maker? You had mentioned before, have the team influence the decision, but in the process, I'm really curious, how do you decide whose role and responsibility is it?
Here's one of the biggest problem in decision making. I got to make a decision, and you're involved, and there are two other parts of the organization are involved, and so I can go and try to convince you and convince them, and we can all get together and get a consensus, et cetera. Or I go to our boss. We all work for the same person, and I can convince the boss about this is how we should, this is what we should do. This is the answer. Then I go say, boss decided, we're doing this. Go talk to the boss. Boss said to do that. That's one of the most common mistakes, and it ignores the tyranny of numbers. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. just for math, let's say that everybody's got 10 reports, okay? One person at the top, 10 people there, 100 people there, 1,000 people there. You've got 168 hours in the week that you can use, sleeping, eating, driving, working, all the things that you do, but 24 times 7 is 168. So the boss has got 168 hours. The next level's got 1,680 hours. The next level's got 16,800 hours. If you can push the decision down, you can scale that, that person can scale that decision process and do a lot more of the process itself. And so what you want to do is figure out whose roles and responsibility. But if you're going to push it down, you got authority up here, you got knowledge down here. You need to have some definition to how that decision is made. And key thing, besides what's the decision and who's the decision maker, is who are the consultants. Consultants have the right to be heard, but not the right to decide. They are influencers. Now, the consultants can be information consultants. They've got data. They could be organization, leader of an organization, as I say, whose ox is going to be gored. They're going to be significantly affected, that you need to hear from them in terms of what the consequences of any particular decision would be. But you need to have consultation. And the big problem people often make in decision making is A, they push it up, and B, they don't consult enough. They don't gather enough information. Now, obviously, if this is a big decision, there's going to be a lot of people and a lot of consulting, et cetera. If it's a little decision, I may talk to that person and talk to that person and then decide, because we're making decisions all the time. So one of the critical part is that push it down, make sure you consult with people. Once you've consulted with people, it's much easier for them to accept your decision, because then first of all, they know you've talked to a lot of people because you did a lot of consulting, right? It's a big decision, so you scaled up the process. And then you probably learned some things that that person didn't know. And so maybe you didn't do what I thought you were going to do, but you did hear my point of view. I did get a chance to influence you. And you did gather a wide range of information. So, okay, I can go along with this. I can support this. If you don't use an adequate process for a decision that needs to be scaled up, you're going to have a hard time executing on the decision, because people are going to resist the decision.
Let's talk about that, the whip versus the bully in a meeting or decision.
So I talked about who's the decision maker and what's the decision, who's the decision maker, and who are the consultants. The next is you need to get the right representatives together, and I'll talk later about meetings, hopefully. That you got to get these people together, and you got to hear from each other, and you got to look at the data, you got to look at the impacts, et cetera, et cetera. And you may have to, if it's a really big decision, like if you're doing an acquisition, you're probably going to have 6-8 meetings. You're going to go out and get some more data, more information, talk to some more people, come back, discuss it again. But eventually you're going to need to come to a conclusion. And when do you stop the discussion and declare a decision? And that's a balance, because if you do it too soon, you're a bully. If you do it too late, you're a wimp. And so you kind of got to find a spot in the middle between those. And what I try to do is I try to make sure everybody is talked, because there's some people that just have to get airtime. Okay, I heard you.
Yeah,
and when they
James
start
in the front row, so.
when they start repeating themselves, I know that it's time to stop them. When they start making the point a different way, it's time to stop them and pull out. But there's a delicate balance. But at some point in time, you have to decide, and you have to decide quickly. If you can make quick decisions, you can make wrong decisions. If you can't make quick decisions, every decision has to be correct.
Oh, that's interesting. So what happens though in that situation where you've pooled a lot of information, but there's still a lot of disagreement?
Well, eventually you got to decide. You got to decide, did I get enough information? I'm scaling, I'm trying to figure out how important this decision is, and did I get enough information? And then I decide. You can't do it by consensus. Consensus is the lowest common denominator, and it takes the longest time. It's a lousy way to decide. You can't do it by voting, where everybody in the room, what do you think, 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 and then, do this. Because everybody isn't affected the same way, and everybody doesn't have the same amount of knowledge. You get 3 votes, you get 10 votes, you get 1 vote, you get 7 votes. You can't do it that way, because that would be a voting way that you'd have to have some kind of weighted voting. What you have to do is you appointed somebody to make a decision. Typically, it's somebody whose roles and responsibility are that. It's somebody far enough down in the organization that they've got the time, the scale to spend on it, and you got to decide. And there's always risk in any decision. If you have a decision that there's no risk, I'm sorry, you overdid it. It's all right to make a wrong decision. It's not all right not to decide.
Say there's the decision, but say there's conflict. Is conflict okay for a company or not?
Conflict is good. You want different opinions. You want people to feel like they can speak up. You want to get everybody's input into things. But when conflict becomes caustic, and I'll talk about that, it's like sand in the gears. It grinds everything to a stop. It stops communication channels. People stop cooperating with each other. And you can generally tell that when things start going from logical or disagreeing about facts to emotional. And you're a bully, you're a bad person, you're a liar, you're a cheat. That's the kind of the top of the scale of emotion. And the yield was some number, or the production was some number, or the attendees was some number that we were, whatever you were trying to measure. That's a very logical level. And you can watch the conversation, and you can, it's again where you got to look at the body language, and you see the emotion and the lack of logic on people's minds, and it'll show through often in their body language.
So say you're looking in a meeting and it's going from the logic to the emotions. What happens then?
Well, I advocate a process I call straight talk. At Bay Networks, that became a term, part of the vocabulary that says, I need some straight talk with you, whoever the person was. And that means we're going to get together as soon as possible after the meeting. We're going to go sit down. The person who called for it's going to talk. And they're going to talk till they're done. And, A is going to talk to B until they're done. And B is not going to ask questions, is not going to interrupt. It's going to be an active listener, probably taking notes. The only thing it might say is, so what you're saying is this, not in a confrontive way. And then when they're done, it's good to say, are you done yet? Then B gets to talk and say all the things they did based on their notes and their beliefs, et cetera. And then when they're done, A goes back and B goes back. And usually you can come to some kind of understanding, because there's a misunderstanding. You didn't quite see each other the same way. And you get to know people very well in that process. Sometimes you can't get it resolved. Sometimes you say, well, let's just take a day. Let's come back tomorrow and finish this, because it's time to just calm down, go away, think about it, sleep on it, et cetera. Sometimes you just have to go get some more information. Let's go see this person and bring in some information, some data, some facts that help with what's this disagreement about. Sometimes you just need to bring in somebody that's an arbitrator, that somebody you both trust, that you can both listen to and explain it to them and let them give their point of view. But resolving destructive conflict is super difficult. It's emotionally hard to do. People will avoid it. It runs rampant throughout organizations, and it's an organization destroyer. You're not going to want to call for straight talk, and you're not going to want to sit down and do that, but you've got to get through those issues, or they're going to interfere with all kinds of other issues.
How important do you think it is to be able to conduct straight talk, to be able to be an active listener in being a leader?
Well, first of all, you as the leader have to be open. You have to realize you're fallible. You're not, you make mistakes. One of the things I think it is important is to call out really what your values are. Obviously, things like truthfulness and dependability are, but you can come up with a list of values that companies do. And I always said that if I'm not, because I won't be perfect, if I'm not following that, your job is to tell me. You're not walking the talk. And my job is to listen and think about that. And if they've got the courage to do it, I got to thank them. And I got to listen to it. Because that's how I'm perceived. Doesn't matter if I'm that way or not, it's how I'm perceived. My influence is not consistent with what I said I stood for.
How important is being a team player in business or being a team in business?
That's the only way. You've all got to be working towards the same objective. That's where managing for results comes in, I think, is everybody's got to be lined up behind what the company has stated it's going to do. Andy's famous thing is job one. This is job one. And you have to understand what job one is. And with every organization, there's going to be a few different things, but really making it clear what the objectives are is extremely important. And you can't have a lot of them. People have too many. If you try to do more than 3 things, most people aren't going to remember them. Maybe you can get to 5 if you're really, clear about it and you're extra strong in communication. And so there's a few things every company has to have to be jobs 1, 2, and 3. And they have to be very clear, and people have to be aligned with that. And if you don't have, it's a team sport, as I said earlier. If you're not working as a team, all towards one single objective, the chances of the team winning are very low. So you need to be lined up behind some key results and objectives. John Doerr wrote an excellent book, Measure What Matters, and he refers to Andy Grove a lot in there. And I can't add a lot other than to say, make your goals simple and measurable. So you got some objectives. These are the 3 things we got to get done. You got maybe 3 to 5 goals under each one of them. That's a lot. And make them measurable. Too many people use words like start, begin, improve, continue. Those are bad verbs. Anyway, I can start, right now I started something. I don't know what it is, but whatever your objective is, when it says start, it's already done because I started it.
Well, you set
or continue. Oh, yeah, I've been doing that. What you need is really active things. I give the example of your goal is to whatever the goal is, but you set there's an objective, but under a goal, for example, is a bad one is like go east. Now, to one person that might mean the east end of the building, another one it might be the east end of the valley, another one might be the east end of the state, and another one may be the east end of the country, and the other one may be the far east. What a measurable goal is, you and I are going to be at this corner of these 2 streets in Chicago at 1 o'clock on December 15th. That's a measurable goal. We're either there or we're not. Going to Chicago, what do you mean by that? Who's going to Chicago? When they're going to Chicago? How are they going to get there? It's a general, it's go east. I always say, that's a go east goal. I want it measurable. I want to be specific. I want to know exactly what it is. And that's what Grove always wanted. And I think John Doerr, who was at Intel for a number of years, did a really good job in documenting when he wrote the book, Measure What Matters, which is a Groveism.
Groveism?
Oh yeah, he said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's very true. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Tying that into some things that were said earlier, how important is it to communicate those objectives, those things that are being measured over and over again? You should be able to stop somebody in the hall or in the cafeteria and say, what are the corporate objectives? Or somebody in your organization, what are the organization's objectives? And if they can name the three, it's a home run. It's a grand slam home run. If they name one of them, that's pretty good, because getting people to remember this stuff is really hard. And so you have to over-communicate. You got to put it in the restroom. You got to put it in the elevator. You got to put it in the conference room, et cetera. You got to feel like you're over-communicating to the point where people tell you you're over-communicating, and then you're just starting to communicate. I'm just wondering, that direct communication, that direct conversation, how many times it's say and repeat over and over again.
You do it in different ways. As I said, you put it in a poster and you post it up, you put it in a newsletter, you stand up in front of people and you tell it, you repeat it when you're in a meeting. That's our third objective. How do we know we're going to get it done? Well, the leader better know what those things are. Otherwise, people will just do what they think is the most important thing to do, and they're not all going to know. Some of them are going to get it wrong. You got to be very specific, and then you get a chance when everybody works at the same thing, the same measurable goals. At the end of the time, it's going to be, people are going to solve the problem. I always used to say that Andy practiced snake worship.
Huh?
And what do you mean? I says, he would find a problem and he would identify the problem and he would glorify the problem. He'd put the snake up on a stick and talk about it and make it very visible. And then somebody would figure out a way to jump up there and kill that snake. But communicating the problem and making it clear that that's what we're trying to do was the critical thing. That's what I call the snake worshiping. Worship the problem.
Oh,
Only the paranoid survive. Andy's book.
Is that another Andy?
Oh, yeah. It's the title of one of his most famous books. And I tell you, Andy was paranoid.
There was something that was said while we were having the prep calls for this. The don't say do the job, no, do the job. Can you talk a bit about avoiding that phrase?
Well, in the objectives and key results, doing the job is not one of them. That's kind of assumed. I mean, everybody's got their sign, everybody has their roles and responsibilities. You're responsible for that. The objectives and the goals to achieve those objectives are the things that we as a team have to do our job. I mean, Pat was leading the 486 design. He's got to do that, but still there are other things we had to do as a company. That was one of the goals. We always had a goal which had to do with a milestone on the product developments or the silicon technology or the manufacturing ramp. Very measurable, specific goal that had, and that would be fanned out, and obviously the people running the factories would have a lot of detail about that. Their objectives went down another level, and their goals went down another level. But when you're writing your objectives and key results, don't tell me you're going to do your job. I expect you to do your job. I want to know, what are we focused on? I mean, in doing your job, you're going to do it towards what goal? What objective and what goal?
Now let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, meetings.
How many people like to go to meetings? We got somebody. Nobody likes going to meetings. Very few people like going to meetings. They say, I spend too much time on meetings. I want to go to lots of meetings. I don't want to be as long. So I think there is a way to have smaller, shorter, fewer, more effective meetings. And this was Grovianism. First of all, what's the meeting for? Define it. You got to be very specific. Second of all, who's going to come? Let's make it the minimum number of people possible. Some people have to represent a group. So maybe you got somebody from manufacturing, and they're going to get the people in manufacturing that are interested in that, and they're going to get their inputs, et cetera. They're going to come representing that particular group or part of the organization. Specify the agenda. What are we going to cover? Don't get off the agenda. Stay on the agenda. The meeting has a purpose. There's something that's trying to get done. Don't let it float and add riders and other things to it. Go through the meeting, hear the points. Sometimes they're decision meetings, sometimes they're information meetings. There's different kinds of meetings, but sometimes they're staff meetings. But follow that through, and at the end, identify what the action items are. What's going to happen as a result of this meeting? Publish that. List the actions required. Follow up to make sure they get done. And if you do that, you'll have fewer meetings, because if you look at the cost of meetings, they're very expensive. It's easy to call a meeting, but add up the salaries of all the people that are in there. You know, a set of weekly staff meetings that are 2 hours long, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a year. That money shouldn't be spent lightly, and people don't like being there anyway. So try to make it as concise as possible.
And for the audience, in a little bit, we'll open up the mics for questions from the audience, but so start preparing. But going back to, when would be the proper time then to call a meeting?
Well, this gets back to the kind of meeting that it is. Most information today can be spread more efficiently and effectively through electronic means than through getting people together and talking about it. So generally, when you're going to call a meeting today, there's an issue that's got to be resolved. And it gets back to decision making, and because these are all interrelated. Conflict resolution, management for results, decision making, all related, and then meetings are kind of like a hygiene factor. It's something you do when you're doing that stuff. And so the decision needs to get made, if it's a decision-making meeting, in a timely fashion, which means when people have to start changing their behavior, what they do. Some people want decisions to be made very early, and nobody's going to do anything different for the next month or two, and the conditions might change. So let's not decide that now. We kind of know what's out there, but let's keep that one in abeyance. Generally, the problem is another one. People wait too long because they don't realize the decisions that people are making, or the actions, I should say, the changes in actions as a result of the decision. They're going to assume a decision and a direction, and they're going to start acting that way. And then if you go this way, that work's wasted. And, efficiency is critical. It demotivates people too.
That's interesting. You'd mentioned a little bit before about writing out or publishing the key takeaways from a meeting.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, the underlying principle of smaller, fewer, shorter, more effective meetings is more work gets done outside the meeting and less, you try to do less in the meetings, because too often in the meetings, there's only one or two people that are really contributing or whatever. And so preparing for the meeting is critical, and then following up on the meeting is critical. And that's one of the ways that you get shorter, smaller, more effective meetings.
You also mentioned the minimum number of people. How do you decide who should be there? Is it based on the decision? Is it based on the time? I'm just kind of curious, because when do you not go to the top person?
Yeah, going to the top is violating my rule about don't push it up. The person at the top could be twice as smart as anybody else, and they're 20% the smartness of the next level. So pushing it up is not a good solution. Most decisions need to get made down in the organization where the knowledge exists and where the bandwidth exists to be able to make those decisions. So when you're calling a meeting, you really have to think hard about, a meeting with 15 people in it, it's wasting a lot of people's time. If you can keep it down to like 5, it's much more effective. But, well, how about that input from those other 10? Well, let's get that in advance. Let's get an understanding for it. They're lightly impacted anyway, or they have a small amount of information. That can be gathered, and you can understand that. Good meetings are small meetings.
How do you prevent meetings from being repeated? You just mentioned before, maybe this won't happen for a month or two. Let's hold it off. I mean, some people might have it today and have to do it again tomorrow.
Well, don't do it before people are going to change their action. If nobody's going to do anything about the decision, you're going to learn a lot of stuff in the next few months. People get anxious about decisions, and that's when they try to pull them in and get them made too early. And it's like, we don't have to decide that yet. Nobody's going to change their actions. No, we don't need that decision made. As I say, more often the problem is that people don't make a decision when people have to change their actions. And so they make decisions too late. And part of that is the fact that they can't make quick decisions. So I say you make quick decisions, you make wrong decisions. If you can't make quick decisions, all of them have to be right. So you have to spend a lot more time on them. You got to be a lot more thorough, et cetera. And it's okay to make wrong decisions. If you start executing on something and it turns out to be wrong, people are going to figure that out. I mean, it's going to become obvious. And then you can back up and take the other branch. But if you sit there at the fork in the road and you contemplate your navel for too long, you're going to get passed by everybody else who can make quicker decisions. I'd rather make a wrong decision than a slow decision or a late decision. Okay.
And then for the audience, when you're ready, if you have any questions, we'll open it up to the audience. And before the first one, I do have a question. I've been thinking about this for most of this conversation. At the very beginning, it was the leader have expectations aligned with kind of the people below, so the expectations aligned. How, as the person, a new person, how can they set the right expectations for their management of what they're capable of?
They don't have to worry about doing that. It's going to become evident. There's going to be things they're good at and things they're not good at. And a good manager is going to figure it out. You're never going to get it perfect. But you certainly got to be able to scope people and understand their capabilities and play to their abilities. It's like a baseball team. You don't put the guy at shortstop who doesn't have quick reactions. You don't put the guy at left field who can't judge the rate that the ball is coming at him. Those are different people and different skills. And so you need to understand, and of course that's what the professionals get paid to do, and they do it with a lot of data today, but and you'll never get it perfect. You'll never understand everybody's capabilities, but that's why I say that a CEO or a leader, a manager, the most important thing is their ability to sense what they've got in the organization and who can do what, et cetera. And that requires, as I call it listening, it's input of every channel.
All right, let's get the first question.
Hi, Dave. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Jim.
Love the discussion. Love a lot of it's a trip down memory lane. We used to affectionately call these house rules. And I wonder, though, these were the things that we lived by in the 80s and the 90s, and here we are 30 years later, 40 years later, different generation working today. We're after COVID, hybrid work. How relevant or how much do you think the house rules need to change, or maybe not at all, for the current generation of workers?
I think this is about people, and people evolve very, very slowly. Yes, current young people have different beliefs than the older people, and that's always been the case. I mean, it's nothing new. And they probably got some better ideas. But they still have to understand that the purpose of life is to be happy. They still have to understand that they have control and they have influence, and they are different. They have to understand that one of the houseisms is you can have anything you want. You just can't have everything you want. So choose. If something's really important, scale it, spend your time, spend your energy, change your influence, et cetera. That hasn't changed. That's true today. That was true 100 years ago, and it's going to be true 100 years from now. Now, the environment, the context is different. And we have to apply that a little differently from a context standpoint. What we do to influence them will be different because they're different. And you got to understand their difference. You got to understand what their thoughts are, et cetera, what motivates them, how they operate. But you still have to influence them if you're going to be a leader. You've got to influence them.
Thank you. Before the next question, for the audience at home, there was a link in the email sent. If you want to submit a Q&A, use that link. All right.
So we're talking about decision making, and I was thinking back to some important decisions that Intel made at the time of the flaw in the Pentium processor. And initially, one decision was made, which was if you could convince us you needed a new one, that it affected your work, we would send one to you. Later, a different decision was made that essentially anybody who wanted one could get one. And there was a lot of new information that came out between those two decisions. But thinking back, what was the decision-making process like leading up to those two decisions, and do you think it was a good one?
I remember those meetings very well. They were in Santa Clara 6 on the 5th floor in a conference room near Andy's office. Andy was the decision maker. He made that very clear that this is one that was so important to the company that he wasn't going to depend on anybody else to do it. There were a number of influencers in the conference room. So we had a series of meetings. And there were a number of people in the room, and there was somebody assigned to collect the input from the field, which was a very important, because we serve the customer. And so that was a very important position. There were people from the design team who were bringing expertise relative to what could be done. There were people from manufacturing who were, we got this many wafers, they're this far along. If we make a decision today, we got to scrap this number. If we make it later, et cetera, we got to scrap more because we're starting wafers every day and every minute. There were people there from marketing relative to positioning, from the PR department in terms of what was the press saying, and we had a number of meetings. There was different points of view. There were people in there that said we should fall on our sword now And there were people that said, this is never going to affect anybody. Nobody's going to know. By the way, the VAX has got a bug in its floating point unit too. And, so they were arguing on that side. And as things developed, the press really picked this up and made a big deal out of it. And so the people from the PR standpoint were representing what was happening, coming in with the facts. These are the people, this is the number of articles, et cetera. And the sales team was coming in saying, people are reading these articles and this is what they're thinking. And I'll never forget, it was over a weekend, and I forgot who it was. Somebody had gotten a hold of Grove on the weekend. And Grove, who had been very staunch, and this is, if it's affecting your stuff, it's such a small thing. But if you really want to, you can return it. Started out, now this is not important. And then it was, well, you could return it. And then finally, Grove came in one Monday, and we had a meeting, and he said, we got to do this. We got to eat these things. How much is it going to cost? Finance people were there. It's going to cost $250 million or something. I don't remember what the number was, to do that. And so we announced, and very few of the units came back. We had fixed the microcode and the engineering team, but of course, there's mask making, and there's wafer throughput times, and there's assembly test, et cetera, et cetera. So the corrected parts were going to be a while, and so that was a very interesting case of a big decision that it was not wrong. The environment changed, and we made the right decision. I think maybe a little too late. I mean, I think we should have bit the bullet a little bit sooner, but that was just my position. There were other people saying, no, we shouldn't have done it even when we did it. But Grove was a decision maker. It was a very interesting process. I remember those meetings very well.
Hi, my name is Chris Cavagioli. I have 14 years at Intel. The Atom-based smartphone and tablets, and then NPG and the data center group and stuff. And what I really enjoyed is how at Intel things would be done in with a certain process. And when we have meetings, typically you write down the goal and the agenda, and then you do it. You pick the notes, you send it out, and you can follow up. And I found that to be very good. And now that I'm not at Intel anymore, working at other companies, and our technologies have changed too, now you try to have meetings and not everybody agrees to write things down and stuff. And then it's like, well, I sent you this. Oh, did you text it to me? Did you send it by email? Or did it come by Instagram or Telegram? But we have so many channels of communication, sometimes it's difficult to organize. And then when we have meetings, a lot of people don't use calendars at all. And at Intel, we used Outlook. Now I use Google Calendar and Outlook, and they work very well together. But some people use Apple Calendar, and that doesn't work at all with the other two. It just doesn't interoperate. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm making a statement that at Intel we had a really good process and good technology and connected it well. And now out in the world, there's so many other options. It doesn't work so well. And one of the challenges I've been seeing is sometimes you ask people a question or send an email, or you have a meeting and you don't hear anything back. It's like, well, hello, are you still interested? And that kind of thing. So,
it's amazing to me how weak many of the management systems were relative to what we had at Intel. I left Intel at the end of '96. I started when it was a small company in the early part of '74. And I left at the end of '96 to become the chairman and CEO of Bay Networks. And as I said before, great engineering staff, broad product line, customer support, no adult supervision. And so what I was able to do is take many of the principles that I learned at Intel, having worked for Andy for 13 years and having been friends with him. We owned a sailboat together. We took some vacations together with our kids, so I got to know him quite well. And these people, you kind of have been in Intel 23 years, you kind of assume that some of these things that make an incredible amount of sense and work would make sense to other people. And when I went to Bay Networks, it was like, no, you know, that's where the term was used was house cleaning, get rid of a lot of people, house training, which was all this kind of stuff, and the house rules. You know, I had a rule. I said, because people would not support decisions. They were, you know, and I introduced the Andy Grove concept of disagree and commit. You have, once a decision is made in a proper process, and I trained a process on decision making, and Intel had one. It was basically based on Intel's process, my dialect of Intel's process. But I said in front of everybody, all the employees, all employee meeting, I said that I'm going to have a public hanging. There's going to be somebody who's the first person not to disagree and commit. And there's going to be a very public firing, because I'm going to fire that person. Anybody want to volunteer? Go first. You know, pretty strong words and pretty strong rules. But I think what you have to do is you have to make it very clear, like Andy did. I mean, Andy riddled us. We went through a lot of training. We went through a lot of establishing process. Andy was a process guy. I mean, he came out of operation, well, he's really a chemist, physicist, was doing TD, but when Intel was formed, the job was operations. And so, yeah, but Andy's very methodical, as was Gordon Moore, about things, and put methods in place in ways that we did things, and we all did them that way. And so what we really did, I think, is we created a vocabulary. We had words that meant things, because we'd had training that taught us what those words meant. And so we could call them up like a subroutine call. You know, that means this, that does this function, et cetera. And I haven't been in Intel for a very long time. I commented that this building didn't exist when I left Intel. So it's been a very, very long time. But I think, I don't know how Intel operates. I don't, and I've been in the nonprofit world the last 6 years. By the way, these principles apply there. Yeah. They apply at home. They apply in your men's club or your golf club or your religious organization or church. These are people. That's why I made the comment about Chip earlier. You have to understand the context and use your influence in different ways at work today. You got to understand your people, but the principles apply.
Yep, good stuff.
Long answer, but I hope it helped.
Hey, Sean, are you getting any questions online there?
We do have a question from online. I'll say that now.
Go ahead and start,
We'll
then I'll ask my question.
So what is your advice to someone who wants to transition from an IC role to management?
From a what role?
IC role.
IC role. So I assume they mean a chip designer.
I believe.
Individual contributor.
Oh.
Individual contributor.
Oh, individual contributor. See, I'm not up on the acronyms. Lead, influence. One of the things I always tried to do is make my boss's job easier. And then pretty soon I had my boss's job because I made his job easier, her job easier. They got promoted, and then who's the guy to replace him? I never really, I mean, I was an individual contributor for a number of years. I came into Intel on a first level management, and I just think you've got to show influence. You've got to show interest, and you've got to make your boss's job easier. The other thing, related piece of advice, never work for anybody that had your job. Work for people, because they're going to think they know your job better than you do, and they probably do. Work for people who've never had your job. So when I came to Intel, I was director of computer development at a mini computer company, and I went to work for Ed Gelbach, who was sales and marketing. And Grove is a production, factory semiconductor guy. I was a chip designer. I was a computer designer more than a chip designer. And so I think make your boss's job easier. Don't work for somebody who's done your job before. Don't go straight up. Go out. Build breadth. I say that your specialty should be generality. You should know enough about enough things to be able to play in a lot of different fields and know where to go when you need the expertise.
Yes, hey, Dave and Sean, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion here. So one of the questions, Dave, I had for you is kind of the importance of being at one moment a mentor and at another moment a mentee. And that always seemed to be a really important part of Intel culture when I was there from '83 to '01.
I think it's about the best way to get things done is through other people. And so if you can help make them successful, that's being a mentor. If you're not listening to people who can give you good advice, you're learning by the school of hard knocks, which is a very inefficient way to learn. The Greeks learned a long time ago that the best way to learn is to sit at the feet of the masters, stand on their shoulders, build on their previous knowledge. So you need to find people who can help you be successful, and that's being a mentee. And I can look back in my life and identify a number of people who have really helped me in making decisions and giving me ideas that help me become successful. And I've tried to do that with other people. Obviously, when I was in a corporate role, there was a lot of reason to do that. Now I'm doing really more for nonprofits and education and helping students who face an opportunity gap have the kind of opportunity that many of us have had. But I think it's still very important to help those people be successful. I mean, there's full-time employees in those nonprofits that are trying to get things done, and giving them advice on how to get things done helps with what you're trying to do, what your mission is in helping others. So that's why I say these rules apply in business, they apply in nonprofits, they apply in your life, in every way where you're interacting with others.
Thank you. That's the positive question I wanted to ask. The second question I wanted to ask, and this is something that I struggled with after leaving Intel and been involved with startups and running consulting businesses, is the challenge in an organization when you're trying to deal with what I call, and I don't know if Andy used this term or not, malicious compliance. How does one either as a first line manager or as an executive manage that kind of behavior?
Without tolerance. I don't think I was ever a terribly obedient subordinate because that's just, being another extension of your boss. You've got to be able to have contributions you can make as an individual. Somebody who's malicious in compliance is doing it without believing it, without accepting it. And they're probably blaming somebody, and they're probably trying to prove somebody is wrong. And I have a very simple statement I give those people. You're probably going to be more successful someplace else.
Thank you very much, Dave. And I've always looked up to you as your positive power of influence because you've always exercised it. Mike, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I got a quick, one quick point though I would bring up. You just, James brought up the mentor-mentee. One thing I think it's pretty obvious, but you never hear it too much. One of the biggest mentees to Andy as a mentor was Bill Gates. In the early 70s when they would meet, Bill would glean on everything Andy said and a lot of the policy. That Microsoft was this upstart, Wild West type of approach. And I remember in a couple of interactions I had with Andy talking about Bill, is that at first they had a little bit of a caustic relationship, but then they started really respecting each other. And what Bill respected out of Andy was the discipline and the process that Intel had in a big company. And the other thing I found from Andy, what he said was Gates had this immense ability to call up any project or task that he had within Microsoft. And Andy would always say, I can't do that anymore because they got too big. But I do think he was a mentee. The question I had for you is, I always found it, and this is in the 80s and 90s, a little bit confusing on management style where performance reviews were always done. And in the performance reviews, you mentioned teamwork was the most important thing for getting things done. Yet when you went into reviews, you would always say, well, what did you do specifically in that team orientation? And a lot of times it's your influence or whatever. So how do you reconcile the fact that teams are what gets things done, but yet we always had a system of performance reviews which said, what did you do specifically in order for me to say I could promote you or raise you through the levels?
Teams are made up of individuals. Part of a performance review is how did you do as a team player? How did you contribute to the overall goals and objectives of the organization? When writing reviews, I always think of them as 4 parts: accomplishments, strengths, areas of improvement, and challenges. And your areas of improvement, the area is probably the most important part, is how do I need you to change? And Andy used to talk about people with fatal flaws. A fatal flaw is something you can't change. He said, I don't want people that don't make mistakes. I don't care if people make mistakes. I care about what they do when they make a mistake. And I think the same thing, if the individual can't play team ball, that's a bad problem. And if you point that out in a performance review, and that you do it again the next year and the next year, that's a fatal flaw. So the only thing you can do in that case is put that person in a place where team play is not important, or let them be more successful somewhere else.
We have time for one more question and then 2 more.
Wrap it up.
We got a line, but we got 7 minutes left.
We're going to give you some time, James.
Would you like to ask your question?
Very useful thoughts and perspectives. Thank you. It's been a nice evening. One quick question, Dave. In terms of management, right? I think the principles you talked about in terms of active listening and communication and so on, that's more when you're basically, let's say, managing down, right? You're a leader of an organization and you're trying to make sure that you're maximizing the output from your team. Do you think those same principles apply managing up when you're trying to, let's say, as CEO managing the board, or you trying to manage your manager, let's say?
Well, first of all, when I said it, I was thinking about peer-to-peer. Mm-hmm. But it also works going up. And I've sat down with Andy in our one-on-ones and told him, I think you're doing this wrong. I think you should do it a different way. Now, he may have been doing one of the 8 that would work, but I had my chance to influence him, and I was confident that he was going to listen. But I think the same thing applies. If one of your subordinates comes to you and tells you that you're doing something wrong, first of all, say thank you, and then make sure you understand it and repeat it back so that you really get it. Because, it takes a lot of nerve to do that. You got to be a confident and brave person to do that. But you are doing a great service to your subordinate, your superior, when you point that out. And the higher you are, kind of the less chance you get for that kind of feedback. Unfortunately, people, as I say, they have too much respect for authority.
Okay,
All right. With that, if people have additional questions, there will be time after to continue the conversation. But for right now, we'll switch it over to James. But let's give a round of applause for Dave.
Thank you. And I might comment for the people online, dave@davehouse.com, send the questions to me, and I will make sure to answer. If you can remember my name, you know my email address.
It's very simple. I can attest to it. He replies to his emails too, by the way. So I want to first off thank both Sean and Dave for a marvelous session here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
And I promise for those who attended here in person and those who are attended online that we're going to do a better job with directions on how to park here in SC12. Because this is not the first time this has happened. But what I just want to say a few things, because we call this at the Intel Alumni Network Board, the Intel Founders Series of Interviews. We started this process as a board, deciding that it was very important to get Dave House, Mike Amar, Ron Whittier, the people that we consider, that we looked up to and admired and were trained by, that we wanted to capture their stories, particularly around how do you run a high output business? Because if there's one thing Andy Grove knew how to do, is that man knew how to keep the trains running on time, right? And he's really good at it. And as I have done a lot of research in this area, really over the last year, suddenly realized the extent to which Silicon Valley is anchored in what Intel did as a company founded by Noyce and Moore, and then Andy, soon thereafter. I got this from Ron Whittier, by the way. How much this valley runs, one way or another, on the principles that Andy taught all of us. That Andy taught Dave, Dave taught us, right? And I always remember Dave having this positive power of influence. That phrase is so embedded in my mind, Dave, and I remember you said it a couple times in a couple meetings, and I've never forgotten it. So this is going to continue into next year. Quarterly, we're going to try to do an interview of a founder. We have a nice list of people we want to interview, and hopefully we're going to get them. And then also look to a big event, December or January, about the future of the semiconductor value chain. That will be the next big event. The Gen AI series will continue on a quarterly basis. And because we're having, regrettably, a lot of Intel employees being exited, we are going to be running a quarterly series on career transition. And with that, I want to thank our friends at the Intel Studio. I want to thank Pat and Roxanne for getting Pat to show up, because we love seeing Pat show up at these events. It's very good, makes me feel good. I hope that makes you feel good too. And with that, folks, it's a wrap.